Hello, young soul. Welcome to the Daily Horror Channel. If you are afraid of real and scary reports, this channel is not for you. I suggest you leave this video, but if you are not afraid of listening to these horrifying reports, I suggest you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next stories. In the confines of a little explored mountainous region, where the roads snake like serpents through the rugged terrain, there is a route that few truck drivers dare to cross. Known among locals as the Cursed Route, this road hides dark secrets and stories of unexplained disappearances. It is a trail marked by legends of lost spirits and truck drivers who were never seen again. This is the scenario where our story unfolds, where a brave or perhaps foolish man will decide to face his worst fears. I've always been a practical guy without much superstition. My name is Marcos. I'm 40 years old and on the road for over 20 years. I've seen a little bit of everything in that time, from bizarre accidents to inexplicable phenomena, but nothing that shook me as much as that cursed route. The life of a truck driver is lonely, but it pays the bills. And that night, I had an urgent delivery to make and no other route options. It all started when I received a call from my boss informing me about a load that needed to be delivered to San Marcos, a small remote city. The route was along a route I had never taken before, but it looked like the shortest on the map. While preparing the truck, an old friend, Jose, approached me. "Are you going to take the route through the mountains?" he asked with a serious look. "They say that road is cursed, man." I laughed at his concern, but his tone made me a little uncomfortable. "It's just a road, Jose. I go and come back quickly," I replied, trying to ignore the shiver that ran up my spine. I left at dusk, with the sun slowly setting over the horizon. The road seemed ordinary at first, but as night fell, things began to change. The asphalt gave way to stretches of dirt and rocks, and the fog became increasingly dense, swallowing the light from the headlights. Around 11 at night, I realized that I was being followed by an old car, a model that I had only seen in old photos. He maintained a constant distance, always at the same speed. I thought about stopping and seeing who it was, but something told me that wasn't a good idea. The feeling of being watched started to bother me. I decided to increase the speed, but the old car did the same. Then, strange things started to happen. First, the truck's radio started playing static, interspersed with whispers that I couldn't understand. The whispers became louder and clearer, as if several people were speaking at once, a cacophony of gibberish voices. I'm not one to scare easily, but it was messing with me. My heart was pounding and my breathing was rapid. The road seemed endless, and I began to doubt whether I was on the right path. I looked at the GPS and saw that it showed a fixed point without moving. I was lost, and the only thing I could see was the silhouette of the old car in the rearview mirror. I decided to stop the truck and try to recalculate the route. I got out of the vehicle, and the night was strangely silent. The fog was so thick that he could barely see a foot in front of his nose. As I walked to the back of the truck, I felt a chill run down my spine and the sound of footsteps behind me. "Who's there?" I shouted, but the only response was the echo of my own voice. I went back to the cabin quickly. The old car was gone. I started the truck and continued driving, trying to shake off the dark thoughts. The clock struck midnight when I saw something that left me cold. A figure standing in the middle of the road wearing tattered, dirty, and bloody clothes. I slowed down, trying to understand what was happening. The figure was of a man, pale and with lifeless eyes, staring at me. I walked past him, but the image kept echoing in my head. I looked in the rearview mirror and the figure was still there, now closer. The radio went back to static, and the whispers turned into a clear, disturbing voice. "You will pay for your mistakes, Marcos." I tried to ignore it, but the voice continued, repeating the phrase like a mantra. The tension was unbearable, and I began to see shadows moving in the corners of my eyes. They were indistinct figures, but their presence was undeniable. They seemed to get closer and closer, as if they wanted to reach me. The road eventually led to an old, narrow bridge. I remembered a story Jose told me about a truck driver who disappeared on that same bridge. I decided to cross it quickly, but when I reached the middle, the truck stopped working. I tried to start the engine several times, but it wouldn't respond. It was then that I felt a cold touch on my shoulder. I quickly turned around, and there he was, the dead-eyed man, now inside the cabin. His presence was oppressive, and his gaze seemed to pierce my soul. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. He began to approach slowly, and I felt my body lose strength. My hands were shaking, and my vision became blurry. I remembered all the stories I heard about Rota Maldita and realized I was living one of them. The figure began to speak. His voice was like an icy wind. "This road leads sinners to the abyss. You should never have come here." The words resonated in my mind, and I began to remember events I had tried to forget. When I was young, I was involved in an accident that took a man's life, and I was never punished. Could it be that his spirit was out for revenge? The truck started on its own, and I started to cross the bridge. The man disappeared, but the feeling of being watched remained. I continued driving, hoping to find some signage that would take me off that road. The dawn was advancing, and I no longer knew if I was awake or trapped in a nightmare. The whispers on the radio turned to screams, and shadows seemed to dance around the truck. I felt a strong, oppressive presence next to me, and every time I looked, I saw the man's reflection in the mirror. Finally, I saw lights in the distance. It was a gas station, a sign of civilization. I stopped the truck and ran inside. The gas station attendant, an elderly man with a tired look, looked at me curiously. "You look like you've seen a ghost, boy." I told him about what happened, and he just shook his head. "You crossed the cursed route. Few survive this trip." I asked about the legend of the man on the road, and he told me that a hiker was hit by a truck on that road many years ago. They say his spirit haunts the route, seeking revenge. I left the station with a feeling of relief and terror. I still had a long journey ahead of me, but I knew it would never be the same. The cursed route left deep marks on my soul, and the man's image still echoed in my mind. As he left the station, the radio retuned to static, and one last message echoed in the cabin. "We'll see you again, Marcos. I will continue driving, trying to leave the past behind, but knowing that the cursed route will always be waiting for me." The sound of the radio echoed in my ears as I drove away from the gas station. The gas station attendant's words still resonated in my mind. Few survived this trip. I had survived, but at what cost? The presence of the spirit would not leave me alone. Every kilometer I advanced, I felt like I was carrying an invisible weight. The night was cold, and the sharp wind penetrated through the cracks in the truck's window. I looked in the rearview mirror, hoping to see nothing, but the fear of meeting that pale gaze again made me shudder. The road before me was a dark corridor lit only by the truck's headlights. Every turn seemed to hide something ready to leap out at me. My hands were sweaty, and I had to constantly remind myself to take deep breaths to keep from losing control. I passed a small abandoned village, ruined houses and broken windows. There was something strangely unsettling about the place, as if the ghosts of the past were still roaming there. Suddenly, I saw a figure cross the road. I hit the brakes. The truck skidded and stopped a few meters from where the figure had disappeared. His heart raced, and his breathing became labored. I looked around, trying to understand what I had seen. It was a shadow, but it seemed more real than anything else. I tried to calm my nerves and moved on. The silence of the night was interrupted by a sharp sound of scraping metal. I looked at the dashboard and saw that one of the warning lights was flashing. Engine problem. I huffed in frustration and fear. I stopped the truck and got out to check. The fog around was thick, making everything indistinct. I grabbed the flashlight and crouched down to look under the truck. The sound of scraping metal continued, but I couldn't identify where it was coming from. Then I felt a cold hand grab my ankle. I quickly pulled my leg, falling back onto the floor. The lantern fell, rolling away, and darkness closed in around me. I tried to get up, but the invisible hand held me tight. Fear turned into panic. I felt a weight on me as if something was trying to drag me underground. I struggled against the force and finally managed to free myself. I ran back to the cabin, my heart beating wildly. I started the engine, waiting for it to respond, and to my surprise, the truck started working again. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw the man's figure, clearer this time. He was inside the cabin, sitting next to me. His gaze was empty, but full of evil intentions. "You can't escape, Marcos." His voice was an icy whisper, cutting through the atmosphere like a blade. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. He started to get closer again, and I felt like he was being pulled into an endless abyss. When I opened my eyes, the figure had disappeared, but the feeling of being watched remained. Driving became torture. Every kilometer a mental and physical challenge. My hands were shaking, and sweat was running down my face. I began to see things along the road. Shadows that moved, eyes glowing in the darkness, shapes that seemed to always be lurking. Then a screeching sound of brakes made me look ahead. A huge truck was coming towards me, its headlights blinding my vision. I swerved to the right, leaving the road and stopping abruptly in a ditch. The other truck passed me, but I couldn't move. The cabin was crushed, and the screams on the radio seemed to come from inside my own mind. I tried to call for help, but there was no signal on the phone. I was stuck there, in the darkness, with the feeling that something was about to happen. Time seemed to drag by, and every second was an eternity. Then, I heard footsteps outside the cabin, slowly approaching. "Marcos, you can't run away," the voice whispered from outside. I closed my eyes, hoping it was a nightmare I would wake up from. But when I opened them, I saw the figure of the man in the window, his gaze fixed on me. "Come with me, and your pain will end," he said, extending his hand. I refused to touch that hand, but the invisible force began to pull me out of the truck. I screamed, I fought, but it was useless. I felt like I was being sucked into an endless void. The last thing I saw was the man, the embodiment of my ultimate terror. When I woke up, I was in the hospital, with wounds all over my body and a searing pain in my head. A doctor explained to me that I was found unconscious on the road, and that my truck was destroyed. They said it was a miracle I was alive. But I knew the truth. The spirit was still outside, waiting. The cursed route hadn't finished me, and I knew that one day I would have to face that man again, that haunting presence that haunted me. While recovering, I planned my next trip. I couldn't run away forever. The terror of the road had marked my soul, and I knew that to find peace, I would have to face the cursed route again. In the darkness of deserted roads, the night becomes a stage for unfathomable mysteries and hidden horrors. Many truck drivers have reported encounters with the inexplicable, events that defy logic and reason. The loneliness of long journeys, the shadows cast by headlights, and the oppressive silence create the perfect environment for the supernatural to manifest itself. This is the story of Paulo, a truck driver who, one fateful night, crossed paths with the unknown in a way he could never have imagined. My name is Paulo, and I have been a truck driver for more than 2 decades. I know the roads in this country like the back of my hand, but nothing prepared me for what happened that night. My routine was simple. Pick up the load, drive non-stop to the destination, rest a bit, and start again. Life on the road is lonely, but I've gotten used to the company of the radio and the stars. That night, I was driving along BR 406, a highway known for its treacherous curves and the dense forest that surrounded it. The load was important, and I couldn't be late. The clock was showing midnight when I saw a man on the side of the road asking for a ride. I stopped the truck and rolled down the window. "Good night, friend. Do you need help?" He was tall, thin, with worn clothes and a look that seemed to pierce my soul. There was something strange about him, but he couldn't leave a man there alone in the middle of nowhere. "Good night. I'm trying to get to San Pedro. Can you give me a ride?" I hesitated for a moment, but ended up agreeing. He climbed into the truck and sat next to me. It didn't take long for the atmosphere inside the vehicle to begin to change. The air felt heavier, and an inexplicable cold set in. "My name is Paolo. And yours?" "Call me Victor," he replied, without a smile. The journey continued in silence for a few minutes until I decided to break the ice. "So, Victor, what do you do for a living?" He looked at me with a blank look. "I've done a lot of things. Now I'm just traveling." The answer was vague, but I didn't insist. The darkness outside seemed to thicken, and the trees along the road turned into grotesque shadows under the truck's headlights. I felt a growing oppression, as if something bad was about to happen. It was then that the first strange events began. The radio, which was turned off, began to emit static. I tried to adjust, but I couldn't tune in to any station. Victor looked at the device with morbid interest. "Sometimes the signs aren't what they seem," he said enigmatically. I ignored the comment, trying to focus on the road. However, the feeling of being watched did not leave me. I glanced at Victor and saw that he was watching me intently, with a look that chilled my blood. Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine. The rearview mirror reflected something that shouldn't be there, a shadow that moved on its own. I tried to convince myself it was just tiredness, but the feeling of dread grew with each kilometer. "Have you ever heard of the legend of the disappeared?" asked Victor, breaking the silence abruptly. "Missing? No, I do not know," I replied, trying to hide my discomfort. Many years ago, a group of truck drivers disappeared without a trace. They say the road swallowed them. Since then, many have reported encounters with lost souls, trying to warn of danger. The story was disturbing, but I thought it was just an attempt to scare. However, the atmosphere in the truck was increasingly sinister. I started to hear noises coming from the container. It seemed like something was moving inside, scratching the metal walls. "What's in your load, Paolo?" asked Victor with a malicious smile. "It's none of your business, Victor, just a bunch of boxes." He laughed, a dry, joyless sound. "Maybe it's more than that. Maybe you are carrying more than you realize." Fear took over me. I tried to focus on the road, but my mind was full of horrible images, moving shadows and whispers that seemed to come from everywhere. Suddenly, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I quickly turned around, but Victor was sitting calmly, looking straight ahead. "Is something wrong, Paolo?" he asked in an icy voice. "No, anything, just tiredness," I replied, trying to remain calm. The truck seemed to take on a life of its own. The lights flickered, the engine roared erratically, and the radio kept making strange sounds. I decided to stop at an abandoned gas station that I saw in the distance. I needed to check the charge and get some rest. As I got out of the truck, I felt the cold night air envelope me like an icy blanket. Victor remained inside the vehicle, watching me with his penetrating eyes. I walked to the back and opened the container. My heart almost stopped when I saw what was inside. A series of old photographs showing the faces of people who had gone missing over the years. Each photo seemed to pulse with a dark energy. "So, you found it?" said Victor, suddenly appearing at my side. "What is that?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear. "It's the lost souls I tried to warn. They are caught between this world and the next. And now, you are involved too." The revelation left me stunned. I felt a growing panic, but I needed to understand what was happening. "Why are you telling me this? Who are you really?" I asked, desperate. "I am part of this destiny. I was sent to guide you through this hell. You can't run away, Paolo. You need to face your own demons." Before I could respond, the photographs began to move, faces distorting into expressions of pain and despair. Victor disappeared, like a shadow dissipating in the wind. The trees around the gas station seemed to get closer, as if they were alive, and the whispers intensified. I knew I had no choice. I needed to destroy those photographs and end the curse they carried. I picked up one of the photos with shaking hands and tore it into pieces. A scream of agony echoed through the night, and the photo turned to ash. The air was still heavy, filled with an evil presence. I went back to the truck, desperately trying to start the engine and escape from that place, but the vehicle was unresponsive, as if it were trapped in a limbo of terror. Suddenly, I felt an ice-cold hand grab my shoulder again. I turned around and saw Victor, once again at my side. It's not that simple, Paolo. The curse doesn't break so easily. Hopelessness took over me. I was trapped in an endless nightmare, where evil seemed to be one step ahead, always watching me, always testing me. I needed to find a way to escape, but every movement seemed to drag me deeper into an abyss of horror. As the night progressed, the disturbing events intensified. Objects in the truck moved on their own, shadows danced on the walls, and cryptic whispers echoed in my ears. The cold was unbearable, and the feeling of oppression left me breathless. I remembered the stories I heard on the road, about truck drivers who were never seen again, swallowed up by the unknown. Would I be next? The idea of never seeing my family again, of disappearing without a trace, was terrifying. Victor, always present, seemed to delight in my suffering. He was not just a passenger, but a manifestation of something much darker, something that fed on fear and hopelessness. Paolo, your journey is far from over. Facing the lost souls was just the beginning. Now you need to deal with the real enemy, yourself. Victor's words echoed in my mind, awakening painful memories of the past. Things I would rather forget, but now came to me with painful clarity. Mistakes, regrets, moments of weakness that shaped my life in ways I didn't want to admit. The road ahead seemed endless, an endless path through a desert of darkness and fear. Every kilometer was a battle against the inner and outer demons that haunted me, but I knew I couldn't stop. I needed to keep going, find a way to break the cycle of terror and save my soul. As I walked forward, I felt a change in the air. The oppression eased a little, as if the night itself was receding. Maybe there was hope, a light at the end of the tunnel, but there was still a long way to go, and Victor's presence reminded me that danger was always near. I didn't know how, but I was determined to fight, to resist the terror that surrounded me. My story wasn't over yet, and as long as I had the strength, I would continue fighting for a different outcome, an outcome that would allow me to return home, to my family, and leave the shadows of the road behind. The Midnight Passenger, continued road unfolded like a dark river, winding through trees that seemed to whisper ancient secrets. Every kilometer covered brought a new wave of tension, a feeling that something sinister was lurking, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Dawn was still far away, and the oppressive silence of the early morning was broken only by the roar of the truck's engine. Headlights cast elongated shadows on the trees, creating grotesque shapes that moved as I walked forward. The weight of the night seemed to intensify, and my mind was alert for any sign of danger. Suddenly, I saw a figure cross the road ahead, disappearing between the trees. I instinctively hit the brakes, the truck skidding slightly before stopping. My heart was beating wildly, and I felt cold sweat running down my forehead. There was something or someone there watching me. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the darkness. No answer. The silence was absolute, as if the night itself was holding its breath. I took a deep breath and decided to get out of the truck, armed only with a flashlight and the pocket knife I had used previously. The flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing twisted trees and branches that looked like skeletal hands trying to grab me. The cold wind blew through the leaves, creating an unsettling whisper. I walked slowly, eyes scanning the room for any movement. Then I saw something on the floor, a torn piece of fabric attached to a low branch. I approached and examined it closely. It was a piece of clothing, but not just any clothing. I recognized the pattern on a shirt my wife had given me as a gift. Confusion and fear mixed in my mind. How was that possible? A low, sinister laugh echoed through the trees, making me spin on my heel. The light of the flashlight revealed Victor, standing a few meters away from me, with that macabre smile on his face. "Are you enjoying the game, Paolo?" he asked, his voice full of malice. "What do you want from me?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "I want you to face your fears, to face the truth that you have avoided for so long. This is not just a game, it's a purge." Before I could respond, Victor disappeared again like a shadow dissolving into thin air. I returned to the truck, my heart heavy with the new revelation. There was something deeper and more personal about this curse, something I needed to understand in order to break it. As he drove, the disturbing events continued. Objects moved by themselves inside the truck. Shadows danced on the side of the road, and sinister whispers echoed in my ears. The feeling of being watched was constant, as if invisible eyes were following my every movement. Suddenly, the radio started working again, playing an old song, a sad and melancholy melody that seemed to come from another time. A woman's voice began to sing, and I felt a pang of recognition. It was my mother's voice, singing a lullaby she used to sing to me when I was a child. "Mother?" I whispered, my voice breaking. The music stopped abruptly, and the radio went silent once again. Memories of my past came flooding back, bringing to the surface feelings I had long buried. The guilt, the regret, the pain of having lost those you loved. Victor was right about one thing. The real struggle was within. I needed to face my own demons, accept my mistakes, and find a way to move forward. But how could I do this in the midst of so much terror? The road began to transform before my eyes. The trees seemed to close in around the truck, forming a dark, oppressive tunnel. The air became thick, difficult to breathe. I knew I was entering a new level of horror, a place where reality and nightmare mixed. Lights appeared ahead, and I saw a small village, almost ghostly in the shadows. The houses were old, with broken windows and doors that creaked in the wind. I stopped the truck and got out, feeling the oppression increase with each step. The streets were deserted, but there were signs of recent life. Toys scattered on the ground, clothes hanging on lines, a fallen bicycle. I walked through the narrow streets, the sound of my footsteps echoing like thunder in the silence. It was then that I saw a figure in the distance, a child standing in the middle of the street. I approached slowly, my heart racing. The child looked familiar, and as I got close, I recognized my own childlike face looking back at me. "You can't run away from who you are," said the child, his voice echoing like thunder. Fear took over me, and I started running, trying to escape that place. But the village felt like a maze, the streets closing in around me, trapping me in a cycle of terror. Every corner he turned found new horrors, familiar faces distorted by fear, screams of pain and despair, shadows that moved of their own accord. Finally, I arrived at an old church, its doors open as if inviting me to enter. Without thinking, I ran inside, seeking refuge. The inside was dark and cold, with old wooden benches and broken stained glass. At the altar, a shadowy figure waited for me. "Welcome, Paolo," said Victor, his voice resounding off the walls of the church. "This is the place where it all began, and where it all can end." "What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice shaking with fear and exhaustion. "I want you to face the truth, to accept who you are and what you did. Only then will you be able to free yourself." Victor's words echoed in my mind, bringing back memories I had repressed. The image of a car accident, my wife's bloodied face, the guilt and despair that has consumed me ever since. "I couldn't save her," I murmured, tears streaming down my face. "And that's why you're here. You need to accept your failure, your mistake, in order to move forward." The revelation hit me like a blow. All the terror, all the suffering I had gone through was a reflection of my own guilt, of my inability to deal with the loss. Victor was not just an intruder, but an embodiment of my own demons. So how can I free myself, I asked, my voice full of despair. Facing yourself, accepting what happened and forgiving yourself. Victor's figure began to fade, and the church around me seemed to dissolve like a dream. But before disappearing completely, he left one last message. The journey is not over yet, Paolo. There are more things to face, more truths to discover. But now, you are one step closer to redemption. I woke up in the truck, the engine still rumbling gently. The road ahead was long and winding, but now there was a new determination in my heart. I knew I needed to keep going, face whatever was waiting for me, and finally find the peace I was searching for. The night was still full of mysteries and horrors, but I was ready to face them. Because at the end of the day, the real battle was against myself, and that was a battle I was determined to win. On a forgotten stretch of country road, there is a gas station that time and modernity seem to have forgotten. The place, shrouded in legends and stories of truck drivers who swear they have seen things beyond comprehension, attracts curious and adventurous people who seek the thrill of the inexplicable. But for Miguel, an experienced truck driver, this stop would become a true nightmare. His story, told in harrowing detail, takes us back to a night when reality became distorted and terror became palpable. He was exhausted that night. After hours on the road, his eyes burned with sleep and his muscles ached. My name is Miguel, a truck driver with years of experience, and this is the story that changed my life forever. I was driving through the countryside, passing through abandoned villages and farms, when I saw a gas station in the distance. The illuminated sign was like a beacon of hope in the darkness. As I approached, I realized that the place seemed frozen in time. The gas pumps were old, covered in a layer of dust, and the main building had broken windows and rusty doors. Still, I stopped. I needed to rest and refuel. The silence was disturbing, interrupted only by the rustling of the trees in the wind. I got out of the truck, feeling the cold night air envelop me. I looked around, expecting to see someone, but the station seemed completely deserted. I took a few steps towards the convenience store, pushing open the glass door that creaked loudly as if complaining about the movement. Inside, the scene was even more sinister. Shelves with expired products, a thick layer of dust over everything, and a musty smell in the air. I walked to the counter, expecting to find someone at the counter, but there was none. Suddenly, a low sound, almost a whisper, echoed through the room. I turned quickly, but saw no one. Hello? Is anyone here? My voice sounded loud and out of place. Silence. The feeling of being watched was intense, almost tangible. I decided to leave and go back to the truck. On the way, I noticed a notice board on the wall. Old photos of missing people, most of them truck drivers. Chills ran down my spine. I went back to the truck, but the engine wouldn't start. I tried several times, in vain. Desperately, I started checking the engine, but everything seemed to be in order. It was then that I heard footsteps behind me. I turned quickly, but again there was no one there. Terror began to take hold of me. I decided to look for any sign of life at the gas station, someone who could help me. I entered the store again and went towards the back. There was a door ajar. I pushed it open and entered a dark hallway. Footsteps echoed across the wooden floor, and shadows danced on the walls. I reached a room where an old mirror hung on the wall. The object seemed out of place with a carved wooden frame. Covered in a light veil of dust, a feeling of déjà vu took over me. I remembered a story my grandfather used to tell me about a mirror that showed things that didn't belong in this world. I moved closer to take a closer look when I felt an intense cold invade the room. The air became heavy, hard to breathe. I stood up quickly and stepped back, but the door behind me slammed shut. The mirror began to fog up, as if someone was breathing on the other side. My heartbeat quickened, panic taking over me. The fog in the mirror began to dissipate, revealing a shadowy figure behind me. I turned quickly, but saw nothing. The mirror seemed to pulse with its own energy, and the figure began to take shape. It was a woman dressed in old clothes and with a blank stare. She approached slowly, floating as if she wasn't touching the ground. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. The figure stopped in front of me and her eyes met mine. There was a deep sadness there mixed with anger and despair. "Who are you?" I managed to ask, my voice coming out in a shaky whisper. She didn't answer. She just raised her hand and pointed at the mirror. Her image in the glass grew stronger, and I felt a sharp pain in my head. Images of missing truckers flashed through my mind, all ending up at the same gas station, facing the same fate. I realized I was trapped in a cycle, destined to relive that night of terror over and over again. Desperately, I looked for a way out. I saw a small window in the corner of the room and ran toward it. I broke the glass with my elbow and crawled out, feeling the cold, biting night air. I ran back to the truck, the image of the woman still etched in my mind. When I reached the truck, the engine started on the first try. I sped off, leaving the phantom gas station behind. But the fear didn't leave me. The feeling of being watched, the image of the woman in the mirror, her empty eyes. All of this followed me down the road, like a shadow that couldn't escape. I told my story to other truck drivers, but few believed me. Some said it was just a legend, others that I was crazy. But I know what I saw, what I felt. The post is still there, waiting for its next victim. And every night I spend on the road, I feel like I'm closer to returning to that nightmare place. The road was never the same for me. Every stop, every gas station, brings back memories of that night. But I keep driving, trying to escape the fate that seems inevitable. And whenever I see a distant mirror, my heart races, reminding me that the terror never really goes away. There is still a lot to discover about the woman in the ghost post. What happened there? Who were those missing people? These questions haunt me, but the truth is that I'm afraid of finding the answers. The road is long and full of mysteries, and I know that one day, somehow, I will have to return to face the ghosts of my past. Until then, I keep driving, with the shadowy image of the woman in the mirror echoing in my mind. A constant reminder that terror is always lurking, waiting for the right moment to strike. The relief I felt upon leaving the post soon turned into an unsettling foreboding. Raoul and I drove in silence, both trying to process what we had experienced. The road before us was a dark, winding, treacherous snake, lit only by the truck's headlights. When we arrived at a junction, Raoul suggested that we stop to rest at a small roadside motel that we saw. The place looked decent, at least compared to the ghost station. We parked and walked into reception, where an elderly man greeted us with a faint smile. "Available rooms?" Raoul asked, his voice still shaking a little. "Of course, you can have the key to room 13, replied the receptionist, handing us a rusty key. We climbed the creaky stairs and found our room at the end of the hallway. Upon opening the door, a wave of cold enveloped us. The room was freezing, but it felt safe. We decided to rest there and think about our next move in the morning. While Raoul went to take a shower, I lay down on the bed. Trying to remove the images of the woman in the mirror from my thoughts, I closed my eyes, but my sleep was restless and disturbed. It was then that I heard the sound. At first I thought it was my mind playing tricks, but it soon became clear. The unmistakable sound of shuffling footsteps began to echo throughout the room. I stood up quickly, my heart racing. I looked around but didn't see anything. The footsteps increased, an invisible presence moving across the floor. I ran to the bathroom to call Raoul, but the door was locked. I knocked desperately, but got no response. It was then that I felt the presence. I turned slowly and saw the woman, floating in the corner of the room, her empty eyes fixed on me. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. She started moving towards me, her footsteps echoing louder, almost deafening. I felt a sharp pain in my head, as if 1,000 needles were piercing my brain. Memories of missing truck drivers, their expressions of horror and despair invaded my mind. The woman was trying to show me something, but the terror was unbearable. Suddenly, Raul came out of the bathroom, his eyes wide with terror. "Miguel, she is here," he shouted, but his words were drowned out by the deafening footsteps. The woman raised her hand and pointed at Raul. He began to writhe in pain, screaming as his body was lifted into the air. I tried to run to him, but an invisible force held me in place. Raul's screams turned into desperate whispers, and then silence. Raul's body fell to the ground, inert. The woman turned to me, and her eyes showed uncontrollable anger. She moved forward, and the pain in my head intensified. I felt myself losing consciousness, being drawn into an abyss of darkness and terror. When I woke up, I was alone in the room. Raul had disappeared, and the silence was absolute. I stood up slowly, trying to understand what had happened. The clock on the wall said midnight, but it seemed like an eternity had passed. I left the room, the hallway now deserted and gloomy. The reception was empty, and the receptionist was nowhere to be found. The motel looked abandoned, as if it had never been inhabited. I walked back to the truck, my mind a whirlwind of fear and confusion. When I started the engine, I looked in the rear-view mirror and saw the woman, her shadowy figure watching me. The shuffling footsteps still echoed in my mind, a constant reminder that the terror wasn't over. I drove away, but I knew I couldn't escape. The woman's curse was with me, and the road was now a place of constant fear. Each stop, each night, brought the possibility of meeting her again. The terror was far from over, and I knew that one day I would have to return to the ghost station to face the horrors that still haunted me. Until then, my life would be an endless escape, my shuffling footsteps soundtracking my ongoing nightmare.